Selma, Alabama, 1871. The curtains went up like dry grass in July, flames racing upward, devouring velvet, wood, and paint. Smoke curled thick and black toward the ceiling. For a heartbeat, the men at the table froze, staring in disbelief. Then, chaos erupted. "Fire!" someone bellowed. "Get water! Get the servants!" shouted another. But before they could move, the fire beneath their feet caught. The trail of oil Samuel had laid earlier hissed to life, crawling across the floorboards like a serpent, igniting chairs and rugs. Flames shot up around the table, circling the men like a cage. Screams filled the hall. Charles Hawthorne leapt to his feet, face red with fury. "Get him!" he roared, pointing at Samuel. "He lit it! That nigger lit it!"
Selma, Alabama, 1871. The night sky was painted in blood and fire. Screams tore through the stillness of the Alabama countryside as flames licked the heavens, swallowing wood, flesh, and memory. The great Hawthorne mansion, once a symbol of power and cruelty, now crumbled in an inferno. By dawn, there would be no Hawthornes left to boast of their cotton fields or their ties to the Ku Klux Klan. And at the edge of the blaze, silhouetted by fire, stood Samuel, a former slave with eyes that glowed not with fear, but with vengeance fulfilled. For years he had bent under the yoke, whipped until his skin peeled, forced to bury his own kin in shallow graves. Tonight, he had written their names across the sky with fire. History would not remember the Hawthornes kindly, but Samuel swore the ashes would whisper their crimes forever. The sun rose hot and heavy over the Alabama horizon, beaten down on the cotton fields of the Hawthorne Plantation. The land stretched wide, white with blooms that looked innocent from a distance, but hid years of blood, sweat, and screams between their rows. Samuel's hands were raw. The calluses had long turned to scars, the kind that never healed, because every season tore them open again. At 28, Samuel's back carried the stories of 100 lashes. The Hawthornes said he was lucky to still be alive. Samuel said nothing. He had learned silence was safer than words. The Hawthorne family prided themselves on their cruelty. Charles Hawthorne, the patriarch, was a man of iron and fire, tall, broad, with a beard that looked like it had been carved from stone. He ruled with a whip and an iron pistol on his hip. His wife, Margaret Hawthorne, hid venom behind pearls, her smiles always reserved for church pews and supper tables, never for the enslaved who served her. Their sons, Richard and Thomas, were cut from the same cloth, young men raised to believe themselves gods who treated the lives of others as cheap and disposable. And then there was Eleanor, the youngest daughter. She was 17, with pale eyes that seemed to search for kindness, but rarely found it in her family's home. Sometimes she watched Samuel and the others in the field with something like pity, but Samuel knew better than to mistake pity for salvation. Every morning began with the bell. Its clang cut through the dawn like a curse, summoning the enslaved into the rows. They bent low, working from sun up to sundown under the eyes of overseers with rifles. Samuel's mother had died in those very fields years before, collapsing beneath the August sun while Charles Hawthorne watched with indifference. His father had been sold when Samuel was a boy, taken to Mississippi, never seen again. His sister Ruth had been whipped until she could no longer walk, then disposed of when she slowed the harvest. Now Samuel carried only memory, and memory was a dangerous thing. One night, sitting by the dim glow of the slave quarters fire An old man whispered to him, "Son, chains can bind the body, but they can't bind the fire in your chest. One day the fire'll come out, and when it does, may the Lord himself step aside." Samuel hadn't understood it then, but as the days dragged on and the noose of the Hawthornes and their kind grew tighter, he began to feel that fire burning, quiet, patient, waiting.
The war was over. The Union had declared victory, and Abraham Lincoln's words had promised freedom. But on the red clay roads of Alabama, freedom was a whisper that vanished as quickly as it came. By day, the Hawthornes still cracked their whips across the fields, claiming contracts kept their former slaves in place. By night, another kind of terror rode through Selma. The Ku Klux Klan. They came first in twos and threes, then in dozens, white hoods glowing like ghosts in the moonlight. They carried torches and rifles, shouting curses against the freedmen who dared to claim land, to vote, to walk with their heads high. They claimed they were the hand of God. Samuel knew better. They were the hand of fear. The first time Samuel saw them was in the winter of '69. He was hauling water back to the slave quarters when he heard hoofbeats on the road. He ducked behind a split-rail fence just as the riders thundered past. Their horses snorted and steamed in the cold, their eyes wild. The men on their backs laughed and hollered, waving burning torches that spit sparks into the night. "Make Alabama pure again," one of them shouted. "Death to the niggers," cried another. Samuel clenched his fists. The fire inside his chest flared, but he held still. Moving meant dying. That night, a cabin not far from the Hawthorne plantation burned. Inside was a freedman named Jacob Turner, his wife and their 3 children. Jacob had dared to speak of running for office under the new Reconstruction laws. The Klan left nothing but ashes and silence. The next morning, Charles Hawthorne chuckled over breakfast. "Serves him right," he said, sipping his coffee. "Negroes thinking they can rule. This land was built by us, and it'll stay ours." Samuel, standing in the corner with a tray, said nothing. His silence was a mask, but behind it, rage brewed like a storm. Weeks turned into months, and the riders grew bolder. They whipped men in the streets, lynched women who dared to resist, and nailed burning crosses in front of black churches. One night, they came for Samuel's cousin, Daniel. Daniel had escaped from the Hawthorne plantation during the war, joined the Union Army, and returned wearing a soldier's coat. He walked proud through Selma, no longer a slave. That pride made him a target. Samuel learned of it when he saw Daniel strung up on a tree by the river, a crude sign pinned to his chest. "This is what happens when a nigger forgets his place." Samuel fell to his knees, the sight burning into him. His cousin's eyes were swollen shut, his face beaten beyond recognition. A crow perched on his shoulder, pecking at what remained of him. The Hawthorne sons were there that night, laughing with the riders. Samuel saw them. Richard with a torch in his hand, Thomas holding the rope. He never forgot it. The Klan was not just men in sheets. They were the law itself. Judges, sheriffs, preachers, even senators wore those hoods at night. In Selma, resistance seemed impossible. But Samuel's fire burned hotter. Each night, as he lay on the dirt floor of his cabin, he thought of Daniel's body swaying from the tree, of Jacob's children crying in a burning cabin, of his mother collapsing in the fields while Charles Hawthorne spat tobacco into the dirt. The fire whispered to him, "One day," and Samuel whispered back, "Soon."
The cotton fields looked endless under the July sun, white blossoms stretching like a cruel sea. Samuel bent low, sat heavy across his shoulders, sweat pouring down his face. Every breath felt like swallowing fire. Beside him worked his younger brother, Isaac, just 19, thin but strong, with eyes that still carried hope Samuel had long lost. Isaac was all he had left. Their mother was buried beneath a rough wooden cross near the slave quarters. Their sister Ruth had been broken by the lash. Their father was gone, sold years before. Isaac's laughter sometimes reminded Samuel of their childhood, back when the world was smaller and freedom was a dream whispered at night. Samuel often told himself he lived now for Isaac's sake, that if he could protect his brother, there was reason to keep breathing. But the Hawthornes saw things differently. That summer, cotton prices had dipped. Charles Hawthorne was furious. He demanded more labor, faster picking, heavier sacks. Overseers whipped anyone who faltered. One afternoon, Isaac stumbled in the field, sack too heavy on his back. The overseer, a man named Carver, drew his whip. The crack split the air like lightning, tearing into Isaac's shoulders. He cried out, falling to his knees. Samuel's blood ran hot. He dropped his sack and ran forward. "Enough!" he shouted before he could stop himself. Carver's eyes narrowed. "You say something, boy?" Samuel froze. Around them, the field fell silent. Other slaves stopped working, their eyes flicking up in fear. "I said, 'Enough,'" Samuel muttered, voice low but firm. Carver grinned, showing yellow teeth. He coiled the whip and turned. "Mr. Hawthorne, you'd best come see this." Within minutes, Charles Hawthorne rode up on his horse, his sons Richard and Thomas beside him. Dust clung to their boots, their pistols gleaming at their sides. "What's this?" Charles barked. Carver pointed at Samuel. He raised his voice, defied me in front of the others. Charles's gaze turned cold. He looked at Samuel, then at Isaac, still kneeling in the dirt. A cruel smile curled his lips. "You're right, Carver. This nigger thinks he's a man." He dismounted slowly, pulling a rope from his saddle. Samuel's stomach dropped. "No, please!" Samuel stepped forward, hands out. "Don't touch him." Charles ignored him. He looped the rope around Isaac's neck. Isaac's eyes went wide with terror. He struggled, coughing, gasping, but Richard and Thomas held him fast. "Time these boys learn their place," Charles said, tightening the rope. Samuel lunged forward, but Carver slammed the butt of his rifle into his gut. Samuel collapsed, choking in the dirt. Through blurred eyes, he saw Isaac dragged toward a tree at the edge of the field. He kicked and screamed, calling Samuel's name. "Sam, Sam, help me!" Samuel crawled, nails digging into the dirt, but the rifle struck him again, splitting his lip. Blood filled his mouth. The Hawthornes laughed as they strung up Isaac. His body jerked and twisted, feet kicking in the dust. His cries turned to choking gasps, then silence. When it was done, Isaac hung limp in the hot Alabama sun, swaying like a broken branch. Samuel lay on the ground, vision dark, rage boiling hotter than the sun above. In that moment, something inside him snapped. The fire was no longer patient. That night, Samuel crept from his cabin to the edge of the field. The tree where Isaac hung loomed against the moonlight. He stood there, staring at his brother's still body, his fists trembling. Tears ran down his face, but his heart felt like stone. "They'll pay," he whispered. "All of them. I swear on Mama's grave, on Ruth's suffering, on Daddy's chains. I'll burn them out of this earth." And in the silence of the Alabama night, the fire in his chest answered back, "Now." The cotton fields were quieter after Isaac's death.
The other enslaved men and women moved like shadows, eyes down, hands trembling with every sound. None dared speak of what had happened, though everyone had seen. Isaac's body had hung for 3 days before the Hawthornes cut him down and buried him in an unmarked grave by the river. Samuel had not spoken since that day. But in his silence something stirred. He felt it when he looked at the Hawthornes, their laughter over supper, the way they drank whiskey on the porch as if nothing had happened. He felt it when he saw the clan ride past at night, torches high, masks glowing like devils in the dark. The fire whispered to him. At first, it was only thoughts. In the stillness of night, lying on the dirt floor of his cabin, Samuel's mind replayed the sound of Isaac's choking gasps. He would imagine Charles Hawthorne in his place, struggling for air, eyes wide with terror. He would picture Richard and Thomas screaming as flames swallowed them whole. "Burn them," the voice said. "Burn the root, the branches, the fruit. Leave nothing." The chance came when Samuel was sent to chop wood near the smokehouse. He noticed how the dry timber caught quickly, how sparks from the fireplace leapt when the wind pressed against the chimney. He thought of oil, of fat, of whiskey, how easily flame might spread if given the right kindling. That night, Samuel walked to the edge of the woods, where the plantation stored barrels of kerosene for their lamps. He pried one open, dipped a rag, and sniffed the sharp scent. Fire would drink this eagerly. He sealed the barrel again and slipped back into the shadows. It became a ritual. While others prayed for deliverance, Samuel studied fire. He learned how to weave rags into torches, how to hide oil-soaked cloth inside baskets of cotton. He watched the wind, noticing how it carried sparks toward the mansion when it blew from the west. And he listened. The Hawthornes were planning a gathering. Charles spoke of it one evening as Samuel stood silently in the dining room, pouring wine. "Senator Claiborne's coming down next month, along with half the Klan leaders in Dallas County. We'll show them real hospitality, a feast, a meeting, and a ride." Richard grinned. "We should give them a show, maybe string up one of them union-loving niggers before the night's done." Laughter filled the table. Samuel lowered his eyes, but inside the fire roared. In the slave quarters, whispers began. An old woman named Lydia, who had lost 3 sons to the lash, noticed the change in Samuel. "You walk with shadows now," she murmured one evening, as he sharpened a broken blade behind the cabin. Samuel met her gaze. "Shadows don't scare me anymore. It's the fire that speaks." Her eyes softened. "Just remember, child, the fire burns everything, even the one who lights it." Samuel said nothing. He only wrapped the blade in cloth and hid it beneath the floorboards. The weeks crept by. The day of the gathering drew closer. The mansion was polished, its windows scrubbed until they gleamed, the kitchens filled with food and drink for the honored guests. Samuel watched silently, every detail falling into place in his mind. He knew where the kerosene was stored. He knew which curtains in the great hall trailed close to the hearth. He knew which doors could be barred from the outside. And he knew this: once the night began, none of them would leave alive. For the first time since Isaac's death, Samuel smiled. It was a grim, hollow thing, but it was real. The fire was no longer whispering. It was singing.
Selma, Alabama, 1871, winter. The night came wrapped in a chill, but the Hawthorne mansion blazed with light. Candles flickered in every window, the smell of roasted hog and sweet corn spilling out into the air. Carriages lined the long drive, horses stamping their hooves as masked men dismounted, laughter echoing across the fields. The Klan had arrived. White hoods and robes hung loose around their shoulders, some already drunk, others boasting loudly about the purity of the South. Samuel stood at the edge of the dining hall with a silver tray in his hands, moving like a shadow. No one saw the fire in his eyes. At the head of the table sat Charles Hawthorne, whiskey glass raised high. Beside him, his sons, Richard and Thomas, already flushed with drink. Senator Claiborne leaned in close, speaking of Negro control and the Northern disease. Samuel moved silently, pouring wine, laying bread, fetching platters of meat. Each time he passed the great hearth, his eyes lingered at the velvet curtains that swayed near the flames. Behind his calm mask, his mind ticked like clockwork. The kerosene-soaked rags were already hidden in the cellar. The barrels waited in the pantry, disguised among wine casks. A thin trail of oil, carefully poured earlier, ran beneath the floorboards toward the stairwell. All it needed was a spark. The evening grew louder. Men sang crude songs, slamming their fists on the table. Margaret Hawthorne clapped politely, pearls glittering on her neck, pretending refinement even as hatred dripped from every word. "Tomorrow night," Richard boasted, "we'll ride into Selma, burn the church, teach them they don't belong." Laughter roared. Glasses clinked. Samuel's hand tightened on the tray until his knuckles burned. He could almost see Isaac's face, eyes wide and pleading. His mother's body bent in the field, his cousin's corpse swaying by the river. The fire inside him was no longer singing. It was screaming. Midnight approached. The mansion buzzed with drunken joy. Men stumbling, women clapping, the air heavy with smoke and whiskey. Samuel slipped into the kitchen. Lydia was there, bent over the stove, her hands shaking. She looked up as he entered. Her eyes searched his face. She knew. "You're doing it tonight," she whispered. Samuel nodded. Tears welled in her eyes. "Lord have mercy." He touched her wrinkled hand gently. "Stay clear, Mama Lydia. Take the others to the quarters. Don't look back." She pressed her wrinkled hand over his. "You carry all our ghosts with you, child. Make it count." Samuel's jaw tightened. "I will." Back in the hall, Charles Hawthorne banged his glass against the table. "Brothers to the South, to the white man's rule forever and always." They roared in answer, racing their drinks. And that was when Samuel moved. He walked calmly to the hearth, set his tray down, and bent as if to adjust the logs. His hand slipped into his coat. When he stood again, the torch was in his grasp. Oil-soaked, flame already licking its tip. For a heartbeat, silence. Then Samuel threw the torch into the curtains. The velvet erupted like a beast set free, fire leaping high, devouring cloth and wood in an instant. Gasps filled the hall, shouts. Men stumbled back as the blaze climbed the walls, licking toward the ceiling. Samuel's lips curled into the faintest smile, and beneath their boots, the oil trail began to catch. The harvest of death had begun.
Selma, Alabama, 1871. The curtains went up like dry grass in July, flames racing upward, devouring velvet, wood, and paint. Smoke curled thick and black toward the ceiling. For a heartbeat, the men at the table froze, staring in disbelief. Then chaos erupted. "Fire!" someone bellowed. "Get water! Get the servants!" shouted another. But before they could move, the fire beneath their feet caught. The trail of oil Samuel had laid earlier hissed to life, crawling across the floorboards like a serpent, igniting chairs and rugs. Flames shot up around the table, circling the men like a cage. Screams filled the hall. Charles Hawthorne leapt to his feet, face red with fury. "Get him!" he roared, pointing at Samuel. "He lit it! That nigger lit it!" But when Richard and Thomas lunged forward, the doorway behind them burst into flame. The pantry barrels had caught, kerosene exploding outward with a thunderous crack. The blast knocked men off their feet, showering them with burning splinters. Samuel stood tall at the edge of the hall, eyes blazing brighter than the fire. His voice, low but steady, cut through the chaos. "This is for my brother, for my mother, for every soul you broke." Richard stumbled toward him, coughing, pistol drawn. He raised it, hand shaking. But before he could fire, the ceiling groaned and a beam crashed down, smashing him beneath a shower of sparks. His scream was swallowed by the fire. Thomas, wild-eyed, grabbed a chair and tried to smash a window, but the glass burst inward as flames licked across the frame. He shrieked as his robe caught on fire, the white hood turning black as it melted into his skin. Margaret Hawthorne clawed at the door, pearls scattering as her necklace snapped. She pounded, screaming for help, but Samuel had already barred the exit from the outside. The fire caught her dress, and she spun like a torch before collapsing. Charles staggered toward Samuel, face twisted with rage. Smoke choked his voice, but his hatred burned clear. "You'll die for this," he spat. Samuel met his gaze with calm fury. "So will you." Charles lunged, but Samuel swung the broken blade he'd hidden in his coat. The metal slashed across the old man's chest. Charles gasped, stumbling backward into the inferno. Flames embraced him like a long-awaited lover, and he disappeared into the blaze. Around the hall, clan leaders screamed and clawed for escape, their white robes now their death shrouds. Fire clung to them, racing up cloth and flesh. One man collapsed, his hood ablaze, rolling on the floor as his skin blistered. Another tried to crawl beneath the table, only to find the fire already waiting there. The mansion groaned as its beams gave way. The great staircase cracked and tumbled, splinters glowing red. The chandelier crashed into the dining table, shattering glass, scattering burning oil across the room. It was no longer a house, it was a furnace. Samuel stepped back into the smoke, his face wet with sweat, his chest heaving. Behind him, Lydia and a handful of others stood in the shadows, wide-eyed. "Go," Samuel rasped. "Take the others, run to the woods, don't stop." Lydia hesitated, tears streaking her face. "What about you?" Samuel's eyes never left the blaze. Inside, screams still rose, fading one by one into silence. "I'll finish it," he said. The roof collapsed with a roar, sparks shooting into the night sky like fireworks. The fire could be seen for miles, a red crown above the plantation. The air reeked of smoke and burning flesh. By dawn, nothing remained of the Hawthorne mansion but ash and charred timbers. The once proud house, the clan's meeting place, the throne of cruelty, gone. And standing at the edge of the smoldering ruins, Samuel watched, his face carved from stone. The fire in his chest was quiet now, not gone, not satisfied, but quiet. For the first time in his life, Samuel felt the weight of chains lift, not because freedom had been given, but because vengeance had been taken.
The curtains ignited first, flames clawing upward with a hungry roar. The rich velvet melted and fell, sparks landing on the polished floorboards. Smoke twisted thickly through the grand hall, stinging eyes, choking lungs. Charles Hawthorne staggered to his feet, fury and fear warring on his face. The fire crept closer to him, licking the ornate rug beneath his boots. "Samuel!" he bellowed, voice cracked. "You!" Samuel stepped forward, the broken blade glinting in the flickering light. With a single sweep, he slashed Charles across the chest, leaving a deep, bleeding gash. Charles stumbled backward into the flames, screaming, the fire instantly clutching his coat. His skin hissed as fabric melted into burning ash, and his final gurgled cries were swallowed by the roar of the inferno.
Richard, drunk and reckless, charged at Samuel with a pistol, shaking in panic. He fired once, but the bullet missed, striking a candelabra that toppled, igniting a small stack of papers on the table. Flames spread quickly, racing along the polished wood. Richard's robe caught almost instantly. He screamed in agony, stumbling blindly into a sideboard. Sparks set his hair alight. He clawed at his burning hood, rolling across the floor in a frenzy, his flesh blistering. Samuel watched coldly as Richard collapsed, silent, his body consumed by fire. Thomas tried a different escape. He grabbed a chair to smash a window, but glass shattered inward, and flames followed him immediately. His white hood caught first, melting into a blackened mask that adhered to his face. He shrieked, clawing at the searing cloth, then fell onto the floor, rolling helplessly as fire devoured him from head to toe. Each scream was another strike against the cruel men who had terrorized Samuel for years. Margaret Hawthorne flailed at the locked doors, pearls scattering like drops of blood on the floor. The fire crept up the staircase behind her. She slipped, her dress catching first at the hem, and in seconds her screams blended with the crackling wood. Smoke filled her lungs, and she collapsed into the flames, clawing at nothing but air. The Klan leaders fared no better. One, Senator Claiborne, lunged toward the kitchen door, but the oil trail Samuel had laid hissed to life beneath his boots. His robe ignited instantly, the flames climbing rapidly. He fell forward into a pile of burning firewood, thrashing, screaming, rolling until the fire consumed him entirely. Another masked rider tried to leap out a second-story window, but the floor beneath gave way, plunging him into the blazing room below. Screams echoed through the hall, then faded as one by one the men and women trapped inside succumbed. Flames danced across the ceiling, eating chandeliers, draping walls, and devouring furniture in waves of fire and smoke. The mansion groaned, a dying beast, until a massive beam collapsed in the center of the hall, trapping the last survivors beneath its burning weight. Samuel watched from the edge of the hall, the chaos reflected in his eyes. Every lash, every scream, every injustice that had carved itself into his body and soul had culminated in this single night of reckoning. His breath came heavy, his heart hammering. When the fire finally consumed the building entirely, only embers and ash remained. The silhouettes of the fallen burned themselves into his memory. Charles sprawled in the center, Richard and Thomas twisted grotesquely, Margaret's pearls scattered across the floor. The Klan leaders' robes were nothing but charred rags. Samuel stepped into the cold night, breathing deeply, letting the smoke sting his lungs. The inferno had cleansed the Hawthorne name from Selma, not with justice, not with law, but with fire and vengeance. And in the stillness after, only Samuel remained, the lone witness to the end of a cruel dynasty.
The first light of morning seeped through the smoke, turning the sky a dull orange. The Hawthorne mansion was no more, just a heap of smoldering ash and charred timber, smoke still rising in lazy spirals to the heavens. Where once pride and cruelty had stood, only blackened ruins remained. Samuel walked among the remnants, boots crunching over scorched beams. His hands were blackened with soot, his clothes singed at the edges. Around him, the scent of smoke, burnt wood, and something heavier, flesh, filled the air. He did not flinch. He had imagined this night 1,000 times, and now it had come. Yet standing there amid the ruin, he felt no joy. Only a hollow, quiet weight. Years of rage and grief had been poured into fire, and though the Hawthornes were gone, the scars inside him remained. Lydia and the others from the quarters approached, faces pale and haunted. They had survived, hidden in the shadows, and now emerged to witness the aftermath. "It's done," Samuel said quietly, voice hoarse. "Too much," Lydia whispered, tears streaking her soot-covered cheeks. "Too much death." Samuel knelt beside a scorched beam, running his fingers over the blackened wood. He said, "They deserved it. For Isaac, for Daniel, for every mother, every child, every soul they crushed. But they don't bring them back." The survivors stayed close as Samuel walked to the edge of the plantation. The cotton fields lay quiet, white and empty beneath the morning light. Once they had been a place of labor and suffering. Now only silence remained, broken by the occasional bird or the whispering wind. The fire had ended the Hawthornes, but it had not ended the world's cruelty. Samuel understood that now. Revenge was a flame, and while it had consumed his enemies, it had also burned a piece of him. He turned to Lydia and the others. "We leave Selma. This place, it will never be safe again. The fire has made sure of that." They nodded, gathering what little they could carry. Samuel lingered a moment longer, looking at the sky above the ruined mansion. Smoke rose in thin columns, disappearing into the morning light. He closed his eyes, feeling the quiet echo of flames in his chest. "Go," he whispered to them. "Live, survive, remember what happened here. Remember the fire." As they departed toward the woods, Samuel remained alone for a moment. His heart felt heavy, yet strangely free. He had taken vengeance, but he had also inherited a solitude heavier than any chains ever placed on his back. The wind swept across the fields, carrying ash and embers into the horizon. Samuel lifted his face to the sky, letting the wind bite at his skin. In that cold, cruel light of dawn, he understood the truth. Fire could destroy, fire could punish, but it could not heal the wounds left behind. And yet, he had survived. In the distance, the sound of birdsong began to return. The world, relentless and indifferent, continued on. Samuel turned away from the ruins and walked toward the woods, carrying nothing but the memory of fire and the certainty that no one would ever harm him or his kin again. The Hawthornes were gone. The clan's shadow over his life had ended, and though the cost was high, Samuel's vengeance had carved a new path, a fragile, lonely road toward freedom. The ashes drifted in the wind, and Samuel walked on.